So if you're a new fan that's joining F1 right now, you're probably looking at the landscape and you're going, okay, my favorite teams, the cool constructors, are probably Red Bull, Mercedes,
Williams.
Yeah, for sure.
The cool teams.
Yeah, you got me there. But realistically, you're looking at the teams that are doing well, successful right now, maybe have a cool paint job or some really cool drivers that you really like, and that's the team that you're kind of rolling with.
The driver that's from your home country or has run races where in your hometown when he was in the karting scene and you went with your parents to see him when you were 10, something like that.
So we took we took the 10 teams in F1, broke them down into a bunch of different categories, rated them by category, and stuck them on a list for you. We're going to roll through some of these numbers for you.
Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Yeah, guys, this is the Turn 1 podcast. We're your host, Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
So, like Jeremiah mentioned, we have a scorecard. We are going to make that scorecard available to you. It'll be a Google link in the description of the video. Go ahead and load that up and play along with us. Rate your constructors on our categories and see how you fare. We'll also be putting our scores in the description as well as on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. But our categories for each constructor are going to be the team principal, current drivers, current performance, livery, facilities, the historical value of the team. So when you think of F1 and you think of that team, what does it incite out of you? Historical performance. How well has that team done in their time in F1? Their potential and their cool factor.
Now, all of these have been given the same weight, so livery is going to count for just as much as historical value. So take that with a grain of salt whenever you hear some of these final ratings. But we just thought that it would be a kind of fun little experiment to do while we're in the middle of the summer break, just something to pass the time by.
Well, something that you brought up that was actually really key. So, like, if you're a new fan of Formula One, you might pick your favorite team based on how cool they look.
Yeah.
It could just be the livery, right? Yeah. Or who has the coolest set of drivers. Like, you might not necessarily be keyed on who's winning every race because it's just Max Verstappen. And if you don't want to be a Red Bull Max Verstappen fan, you have to find something else that takes you to a team. So maybe these scores help.
Yeah, let's say you're a very serious Pierre Gasly fan. Then, maybe Alpine's your team, in which case I'm sorry.
If you're from France, Alpine is definitely your team.
There's not a doubt about it.
So we're going to go through each constructor, but we're going to do it by the category of scores that we have listed. So maybe you can't quite piece together our scores until the very end. But of course, like I said, we'll be listing them so that you can compare your scores to ours. And let us know what your scores are. Send us a link with your scorecard or post the standout scores in the comments. If you put Williams livery at a 10, let us know about it. Okay, let's start with team principal. We won't hit all of these, but we'll hit some highs and lows.
All right, and now we're going to go into a 45-minute segment where we talk about every single team principal.
Not every F1 fan, unless you're super in the sport, knows all the team principals. Some of them are behind the scenes.
Then we'll hit the high points. Alpine.
It's got to be a 1.
It's got to be a 1. They don't have a team principal.
So as of the time of recording this, it's the middle of the summer break for F1. Alpine fired Otmar last race weekend. And so they don't really have a team principal, so they have to get a 1. I will say this. I put Red Bull at a 9.
Wow. And why is that?
Because Christian Horner is great. But do you know who Christian Horner is not? He's not Total Wolff, who's at a 10.
For somebody who's a massive Red Bull fan, you just ride Total Wolff all the way to the end, don't you?
Yeah, he's kind of awesome, isn't he?
I guess so. I mean, I have Total Wolff and Christian Horner both at a 10 because if you take it for what the position is, which is team principal, not partial owner or investor, but if you take it for what it is, team principal, Christian Horner and Total Wolff are pretty spot on.
Where'd you put Gunther?
I got him at a 6, but that's because I'm very harsh on the rest of them.
I gave him a 7.
Ooh.
Just because I like Gunther. I don't even know if he's good at his job.
Well, I know that he's good at his job because, he has to deal with Haas, first of all. Now, I know he doesn't make all the best decisions, maybe in drivers or something like that. But when you don't have a lot of finances to deal with and you have a small team that you're working with, you have to get the best out of it. And I think for a team that's not in the bottom three, I think they're, fourth from the bottom?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Eh.
Come on.
I will say, so we're considering Zach Brown from McLaren to be the team principal. We know he's the CEO. We know they have somebody else that does this, but he's the face of the organization. He's calling the shots. So if this would have been 4 weeks ago, I would have given him like a 4. But I'm giving him a 7.
I gave him a 6 because I was going to put him at a 4, but for exactly what you said, I got him at a 6.
Him stealing Piastri from Alpine.
And then with the developments of the car in 2023 so far.
He's making a state. I said at the beginning of the year he should be fired.
Yeah.
And that is looking like a bad decision now. I think you keep him.
Okay, current drivers.
Ooh, the current driver lineup as they exist today.
We'll talk about the top teams first. Max Verstappen, Red Bull. I've got them at a 9.
I also have them at a 9.
Okay.
Why your 9?
I'll get to that after I talk about the other ones. So Mercedes, I have also at a 9.
Okay.
Ferrari, I've got it a 9. Now,
3 teams
now
at a 9.
Now it's time for the explanation. Max Verstappen's a 10, but Sergio Perez is not.
Yeah.
Charles Leclerc, I can't give the 10 because he is inconsistent in some of his decisions on the track.
Yep.
Carlos Sainz, however, has all that mentality, but he is inconsistent on performance. So it's an even trade-off. I can't give them the 10. I give them a 9. Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton is one of the best of all time, and George Russell is very good. I don't know if he's going to be one of the best of all time. And for that reason, because I don't know where George Russell's going to stand yet, I have them at a 9 as well.
Okay, and that's understandable. So mine are close. I put Red Bull at a 9. Just like you said, Sergio is great. Don't get me wrong. But if Red Bull could have Lewis Hamilton or Fernando Alonso.
Even if they had like a Carlos Sainz, that would bring them to a 10.
Yeah, it would bump them up that final. Sergio's great. Like, don't get me wrong, but there's better drivers on the grid. Mercedes and Ferrari, I both put at 8s.
Wow. Okay.
The Lewis discussion, he's okay this year, but he's still not champion Lewis. George hasn't gotten to where Valtteri was yet as a second driver. And then when you look at the Ferraris, they both have a ton of potential, but like you said, Charles makes dumb decisions and Carlos is always fighting with his engineers. And it's like, when is that going to result in success?
That's part of Ferrari's problem, not
it
Carlos's
is,
problem.
But we can never really see their true potential on track.
Also, George in 2022 was Mr. Consistent at 5th place.
And that's why they have an 8, not a 9 or a 10.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the lower performances before we jump on for current drivers. I've got Alfa Romeo at a 2. and the reason why is because Valtteri Bottas is great, but he was never one of the greats whenever he was at the top team. And Zhou Guanyu is doing good, but he's not there. He's just not there yet. He's close, but he's not there.
You gave them a 2. I gave them a 4, mainly for Valtteri, and with the hint that maybe Zhou can do something, but I don't think he's going to be there long enough to do much.
I will say I've got Haas at a 5, and I wanted to bring that up because I know you disagree.
I have Haas at a 5.
Are you serious?
Because they are average drivers.
Okay.
5 is right in the middle.
That's fair.
That's the same reason I have Alpine at a 5.
I have Alpine at a 5 as well.
I think if you give the Haas drivers the Alpine car and you give the Alpine drivers the Haas car, they have the same performance they have now.
Okay, so this is current drivers. Real quick, the last one, I think we've named every single team at this point. But where do you have McLaren?
7.
I have them at an 8.
I don't know if we see.
You have to remember, I have Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull at 9.
So you got a gap.
So I've got a gap to 8 in McLaren, and I see a lot of potential in Oscar Piastri, and I already know the potential of Lando Norris, and they're getting to show it now with the car that they have.
I see more potential in Oscar Piastri than Lando Norris.
Possibly.
Way.
But Lando's been quick since day one,
I
just
see
like
a
Oscar.
champion in Oscar Piastri.
I see a champion in Lando if McLaren could give him a car.
I don't see a race win in Lando, do you? Because
Yes.
haven't seen one yet.
No, haven't seen it from Oscar.
Oh, well.
He has the same problem Lando has. He's stuck on McLaren.
Which stuck on might not even be the...
It might not be a problem in the
going
future. Okay, we got to move on. Current performances.
Red Bull 10.
Yeah, Red Bull 10. That's an easy
mean,
one.
They're literally having the most dominant season of any constructor.
Do you have anybody at a 9?
I
Or do you give Red Bull that big of a gap?
only have 2 teams at an 8, nobody at a 9.
I have Mercedes at a 9. Who do you have tied for 8?
I have McLaren and Mercedes tied at 8.
I have McLaren at 8 and Mercedes at 9 because they have the edge by just a hint.
Right when we started filling out these scorecards, and maybe if you're filling out your own scorecard, this might add some guidance. We started looking at just the constructor standing. We said, okay, current performance would be the constructor standings, right? 10 down to 1.
Right.
But man, a lot of things have changed since the first race of the
Aston
year.
Martin's no longer way at the top that they were, even though their standings is still up there just because of the points they accrued in the beginning. And McLaren, their points are in the dump, but their car is near the top.
If you look at standings, McLaren should have a 6th spot right here, but we both bumped them up to 8, right?
Right.
Because they're kind of dominant right now. And meanwhile, Aston Martin, who at the beginning of the season would have been an 8, is now a 6 on my list.
I have Ferrari and Aston Martin tied at 7.
I have Ferrari at 7, Aston at 6.
So you say Ferrari's ahead of Aston right now because of the Lance hindrance?
Because of the Lancing.
But
both Ferraris finish ahead of Lance.
I think that if you had 2 Fernando Alonsos in the car, then they would be finishing ahead of Ferrari. That's why I have them where they are.
But you don't have 2 Fernando Alonso's in the car.
That's true.
There's only one. He's so unique. I have AlphaTauri at a 1.
For current performance?
Yeah.
I've got them at a 3.
Because they're not any good.
Yuki and Danny.
And I got
Danny
that because of our original, like, we're gonna rate them 10 down to 1, and then I looked at it and I was like, you know what? That can stay there. That 1.
Gosh.
I mean, you said a 3? I've got Alfa Romeo at 2 and Haas at 3.
I've got Haas at 4 for current performance, and I've got Alfa Romeo at 3.
The Haas I might only bump up to like your 4 based on how they've been doing in qualifying.
Right. That's why I've got them there.
But race day, they don't really show that.
All right. Moving on to the most important category of all of them, the one that should carry the most weight in this decision, livery.
You joke, but seriously, when we started watching F1, sometimes I was just looking for like the cool car. Like Ferrari looked cool, you know. I've always liked McLaren's orange car. I know that
Mercedes always has an awesome car.
I know not a lot of F1 fans like the McLaren car, but I do.
Red Bull brings a dynamic, different concept paint every single year.
Or do they send out their memo that says, "Here's our car for this year. It's the same as last year."
Yep. It's the exact same car every year.
And you know my obsession with Aston Martin. I've always loved the Aston Martin like production cars.
The green is nice.
And that green, that's Aston Martin green.
The green is nice.
That's their thing.
Okay, so instead of talking about the liveries, let's talk into some numbers. Red Bull, what do you have their livery at?
4.
5. Yeah, sounds about right.
It could be so much better.
It could be.
Like the white Red Bull was so cool.
I'll say this: you're gonna disagree with me on the third name that I'm gonna give, but I have 3 teams tied at 5, and that's Red Bull, Alpine, and Aston Martin. The green is cool, but
I disagree with you on Aston Martin.
It's just green with a random yellow stripe down the bottom.
Yeah, but I love that green.
I know you love the green,
so
but the yellow stripe it just throws it off.
I did give Alpine the same score as my Red Bull. Both are at a 4 for me. Sorry, the blue, and we're talking about mainly the blue Alpine here.
Right. Yeah. If it was the pink one, I would have given them a higher rating, but because it's the blue with the pink side pods,
it's just not cool.
Yeah. It's okay. McLaren, because you're so big on their orange car, but this car is different.
7.
Really?
Yeah.
Dude, I gave them a 3. That thing is ugly.
Oh no!
I'm sorry, but like it's too much. So they have this red and blue and black and yellow striped pattern that just cuts all around the car. If they had gone with like the solid orange with like blue accents or black accents, not yellow but white, it would look awesome. But it's too much going.
I still like it. My biggest surprises. So I put Mercedes at 8. Also at 8 is Alfa Romeo and Williams. I think Williams does blue way better than Alpine does. And Alfa Romeo looks like a Ferrari that added a ton of black.
Yeah.
And it's so cool.
So that's funny you say that. I've got interesting. So as far as my livery, I have 3 teams tied for my top spot, and that's going to be your Ferrari, because that all red with the black accents on the edges is always super sick. I've got Mercedes at an 8 with the same all black car that they rolled out as super sick. And then the Williams I've got at an 8 because of the all blue. And I've come to a conclusion just now as I was looking at this list. That's why I kind of was sitting here for a second silent. all of my top teams are cars that are one solid color with a one color accent.
Simple.
So Williams, all blue with a black accent. Ferrari, all red with the black accent. And then Mercedes, all black with their signature blue color.
What did you give Alfa Romeo?
Alfa Romeo, I gave him a 6.
Okay. So my top team was Ferrari at a 9. I still think that's a most iconic car.
Yeah. Okay, so my number 1 worst rating that I gave out, my biggest wow factor, I gave AlphaTauri a 1.
I gave them a 5.
It's boring.
Yeah.
Boring. It's white and like this dark blue, and like the bulls on it is a cool decal.
The red accents from the Orland sponsorship kind of help a little bit.
It helps it, but the problem is that like if that's going to be your colors, pick a different pattern, because that pattern is kind of lame.
And you know, it's matte blue and matte white too. Like it's not a shiny.
Yeah, there's no
car.
shine to it at all.
Yeah, I could see that. So I gave them a 5. I gave Haas a 5. You know what? You know what would get a 10 on my list? The Tiger Stripe Williams.
Ooh,
That
you know what would get
list.
a 10 on my list is whenever Red Bull wheels out its fan designed cars like they did for Miami and they're going to do in the future here. That's always some kind of cool design. I'll say the McLaren car that's white, black, and yellow, where it's like the 3 different ones. I would give that one a higher score. I know you disagree with me on that
one.
but I would give that a higher score.
Okay. Well, let us know what y'all think about your livery choices, and if you agree that Red Bull and AlphaTauri, the 2 Red Bull teams, have so
Terrible.
much to offer, and they
So
just do
boring.
nothing. Okay, facilities,
This one,
a little tough.
yeah, because it's not like, first of all, we didn't take a tour of all 10 facilities before we made this list.
I did.
Okay. Well, but besides what Thomas does in his dreams, I didn't take a tour of the facilities. So
I also flew first class everywhere.
Yeah, you got a tour specifically from Christian Horner. Then you flew over there and got a tour at Mercedes from Toto Wolff. Had dinner with Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, no, it's tough because like all we have to go off of is like what we hear about the tech behind like the wind tunnels and the testing facilities, what you see on Drive to Survive about kind of the cool factor of the facilities, and then finally just Googling them and looking at them.
Yeah, and you know, if you Google them, you can look at Google Images, or another thing that you can do to kind of tell the size, if it's hard to tell from a picture, is you can go straight to Google Earth, type in the facility, it'll take you straight to it, and you can kind of get like a 3D, I guess, estimate of how big it is. And if it's a big facility, you got to assume that it's going to have
They've
a
got
lot of
stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a good facility.
Okay, I have 4 teams at a 9.
I have 3 teams at a 10.
Okay, well, you go first.
Well, because I don't know what's inside of these facilities, so it's hard to tell. So I have to go with fact base. And the facts are that Red Bull has has regularly wheeled out a hyper competitive car, meaning that they have to have some of the best technology. I gave them a 10. Mercedes does the same thing, even though they might have missed the beat with these last couple cars. All of the cars before that were hitters.
That was a design misstep, not a lack of
facility.
Yeah.
So I gave them a 10. And Ferrari, the home of F1, I'm going to give them a 10 because I'm going to assume that with the most money out of all of these different teams and with the most sponsorship, with the most name, with the most brand, I'm going to just assume that they have the best facility.
They've got by far the most money.
Right.
Maybe outside of Mercedes, but I know Ferrari's funding more F1 money than Mercedes is. So I gave Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari 9s, and I also gave McLaren a 9.
You gave McLaren a 9. I gave McLaren a 8.
If y'all are not familiar with, so if someone gave me the keys to an F1 team and they said, hey, pick whichever facility you want, I'm picking McLaren's.
Dude, if you look at their
It
facility
looks
from the outside,
so-
it's so sick. They've got this circular pond on the outside with a path that travels all the way around it. Oh, it's so
And then
beautiful.
the facility like fills in the other half of the
Yeah.
pond shape. And then every time on Drive to Survive, you see like Zach Brown walking down the hallways. It's just lined with like hanging F1 cars.
Yeah,
and
or if it's not hanging, then on the ground there's just rows and rows of championship cars.
And similar to the Ferrari discussion, we know McLaren's history. We know their money. There's no way they don't have an awesome facility for F1.
You're right. Maybe I was a little wrong in putting the 8. Maybe they deserve a 9. I didn't give them a 10 just because of the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, aren't they working on their facility, like building a brand new wind
they're adding
tunnel
something
and
to,
everything?
so that means something in there's behind,
Right,
time-wise. I did give AlphaTauri a 2 because theirs looks like a shack in the middle of nowhere, Italy. AlphaTauri took over the old Minardi factory, which was in Fanzia, Italy. I'm sorry, I'm butchering that name, but it's somewhere in like the central part of Italy. It's a small little town, and it looks like a factory building. And I just can't imagine, and based on what we're seeing out of their car, I can't imagine they've got a ton of stuff in there.
Right, exactly. Without being able to see the inside of these facilities, it's kind of hard. So I kind of gave AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, and Haas all of a 6, just because I'm not really sure. And obviously they don't have the best technology available out there in that facility, and that's why they're not producing the best car. Or maybe it is people, and maybe they have a banging facility. I have no idea. But there is one that I do know about, and that's the one I'm going to talk about. Aston Martin. I gave them a 6 because right now their facility sucks. It does. That's why their car has been terrible in the past. That's why they are getting a whole new facility being built that's going to be state of the art. They're going to be able to communicate way more efficiently. They're going to be closer so that they don't have to have, there's not this lack of communication where like you can only talk to people through emails or phone calls. You can really just turn around and talk to your neighbors the way that they described it to us. And if that's the case, then they're going to be competitive. Then they'll go to an 8 or a 9. But until we see that, they're a 6.
So the Aston Martin facility is super interesting. You can find this, like Jeremiah mentioned, just Googling it and like looking on Google Maps or Google Earth. It is literally right across the street from Silverstone. And it's the old like Force India factory. And it looks like a shack. But the problem is that's not their whole facility. Like Jeremiah was mentioning, their facility is like really segregated into different parts. And even today, as they're building their new facility, they're using parts of the new facility, parts of the old facility. And like he said, they're having to do all this back and forth. Once they get their new facility, it will be a 10.
Oh, you think so?
It looks so, the renderings.
Well, and they have a billionaire for a team owner.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to historical value. So when you think F1, does this team come to mind?
This is not how well have they done throughout the years. This is when you think of the sport of Formula One, there's teams that pop into your head. What are those teams?
Do we each have a common number 1 here?
I think number 1 has to be the number 1 of all number 1s. That's Ferrari.
Gave them a 10.
You gave them a 10. Yeah. You got to give them a 10. They are the sport of Formula One.
Who's your number 2?
Number 2 is McLaren. I gave them a 9. Dude, they are synonymous with F1.
So when you go back and look at like championship history and all that, it's Ferrari at like 16 and then McLaren at like 8 or 9 championships. But they've both been in the sport since basically the start. And again, those are just the 2 supercar brands that you're like, they make awesome production cars and then they also make awesome F1 cars. And it just makes sense. Where did you put Red Bull and Mercedes?
I'm glad that you asked this.
Because these are the toughest.
I'm glad that you asked this. I have them both at an 8, and here's the reason why.
Okay.
Since their inception in Formula One, they have been synonymous with the name. You can't take that away from them.
So for a 20-year period,
you can't give them a 9 because they didn't come in anywhere before anywhere in the 80s or 90s, and you can't give them a 10 because they weren't around in the 50s.
Red Bull was 05, Mercedes was 2010, 2009, somewhere in there.
They weren't that far off of each other, but that's my point, is that since their inception in Formula One, they have been the talk of the sport. So you kind of have to give them a high place. You can't give them, because it is historical value. So as far as their history, it's not a long history. You can't give them a high number. I gave them 8s because their time in there that they have had has been top tier, most important possible.
So when you look back at like this era of F1, it's going to be Red Bull and Mercedes.
Right.
I will disagree with your scores though. I gave Mercedes a 7 and I gave Red Bull a 6.
Ooh.
And I know that hurts, but I scaled the other teams accordingly. But here's why. When you look at championships, right, which is really what constructors are based on, Ferrari has 16. McLaren has 8. Mercedes also has 8. Red Bull has 5 constructors championships. There's one specific team we're not talking about yet, but we'll get to
That's
them.
fair.
So I put Red Bull at a 6. Now, granted, they've been dominant since 05, but they don't have the history of Ferrari. They don't have the championships of Mercedes or McLaren. But to give context, I gave, Aston Martin a 2. I gave AlphaTauri a 1. I gave Alfa Romeo and Haas a 2. I scaled it accordingly. So Red Bull's still way ahead of those teams.
Right. I've got Haas at a 1, Aston Martin at a 1. They didn't bring any historical. Where do you have Williams?
So I'm getting to that. I gave Haas a 2 only because they're going to go down as like the American team of this time period. Okay. So that adds they're going to be remembered only for that. Williams, I gave a 7.
Wow.
So here's why. In F1 lore, Williams has 9 championships. That puts them second behind Ferrari. But they have also been in the sport pretty much as long as Ferrari, and they have half of the titles of Ferrari, and recently they've done nothing. And I'm going to venture out to say like 50+% of current F1 fans became F1 fans in the past 4 or 5 seasons. They ain't going to know Williams was great historically.
That's fair. All I know is that if McLaren's going to be at a 9, then I'm also putting Williams at a 9.
And I can see the argument for it.
Williams has more titles.
They do. Just their last one was in 1997. But you know what? McLaren's last one was in 1998.
This isn't current. This is historical. So it's tough. It's hard to say on some of these teams that have the history of great success, but then might recently not be
As
up
good.
to par.
So let's move into some performance type stuff.
Historical performances.
So so this kind of takes out the how long have they been. So like, with Williams, this removes that as a variable. They've been in the sport for 70 years. Okay, don't care. How good have they been in that 70 years? Who's your lowest?
Who's my absolute lowest?
For historical performance.
Haas.
I put Haas and AlphaTauri both at a 1.
I put Haas at a 2. I guess I should have put them at a 1 because they've done absolutely nothing historically whatsoever. But who was the other one? AlphaTauri?
I put them at a 1 too.
For historical performance?
Yep.
Sebastian Vettel, Max Verstappen.
How many championships did they have?
All came out of AlphaTauri. Sebastian Vettel, how many does he have? Oh,
No.
I'm sorry. Sebastian's got 4. Max has got 2.
AlphaTauri?
Where did they start?
That doesn't matter where they started.
When they were at AlphaTauri, AlphaTauri was good. AlphaTauri has a historical... Oh, you know what? This would be more of an argument for historical value because they birthed champions.
I would agree with that.
But historical performance... Well, they won a race. Max won a race.
They get a 1. Okay, leave them at your 2.
Haas has never won a race.
Yeah, that's why I have them at a 1.
So then AlphaTauri has to be at a 2.
I gave Alfa Romeo because of their Sauber history a 3.
I gave them a 4.
Aston Martin I gave a 2 because they've been in the sport the shortest amount of time and they haven't done anything yet.
Pretty much.
I mean, this is their only year that they've been kind of good.
Yeah.
Alpine, we haven't really talked about them much because I literally gave them like a 4, 5, or 6 for every single category, I think, except for team principal. I gave them a 5 for historical performance.
Same.
Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes all get 8s for me.
Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes all get 8s. So nobody gets a 9 and Ferrari gets a 10.
Ferrari gets a 10.
You have that big of a gap to Ferrari.
So Red Bull has been in the sport since like 2005, I believe, and they've won 5 championships constructors-wise, and they have more drivers' championships. Pretty good for 18 years in the sport. Mercedes, same thing. Entered 09, 010, immediately went on a run with Lewis and Nico and Valtteri. That's an 8. But in McLaren as well. McLaren's been in the sport a long time. They have 8 championships. But Ferrari, the fact that they have 16 just outweighs anything of recent relevance in the sport. What are your thoughts?
I've got Ferrari at a 10. That's a guarantee. There's
I thought you were about to give them like a 7 or something.
No, there's no arguing with that. They are who they are. All the way back to Alberto Ascari. Juan Manuel Fangio.
Yeah.
No, it's Alberto Ascari.
They've had every good driver.
Anybody who's ever been anything is kind of Ferrari.
Yeah, I mean, Vettel left his championship-winning Red Bull for 4 years to go to Ferrari.
Fernando to Ferrari.
Kimi Raikkonen
to Ferrari.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah. No, I definitely hear you. So, as far as historical performance, Red Bull at a 9, and the reason why is because you listed all of their championships, but what did they do in the rest of the years? 2nd, 3rd, 4th, at the very lowest 7th, and that was for 1 year.
Yeah.
My point remains is that in the time that they have been in the sport, they have been a successful team almost every single year. So I gave them a 9.
What'd you give Mercedes?
A 9.
Okay, I thought you were gonna
No,
go.
Mercedes also gets a 9, and
Yeah.
the reason why is because their time in the sport, they had their dominant era, but they've also had off years, but they've never been off years like finishing 10th or 9th or 8th. No, they're finishing near the top. So for that reason, they both get 9s. McLaren, I have an 8, and the reason why is because they haven't been a championship team since what?
98.
Exactly.
And I can see, looking at my rankings now, I could probably drop McLaren to a 7 because, again, I put McLaren and Mercedes on the same tier, but they have the same number of championships, but it's been a while for McLaren.
McLaren has twice the lineage.
Yeah, it's been a
Right,
while.
twice the lineage, but the exact same amount of accomplishments. That's a problem.
Yeah, I could see that change.
Okay, this next one is potential. So the thing about potential, I asked Thomas about this because I wanted clarity. Are we talking about potential for future years or not? And your response was?
So, yes. So with what they have now or the near future, which could be this season, next season, maybe setting up for the season after that, where do you see this team going? So either looking at their current driver lineup or making one very easy change. So you could say, like, okay, remove Zhou Guanyu, replace him with a better driver, whatever it is. Looking at their facilities that are being built, things like that you look at this team and you're like, this team is either on the up or they're on the way down. What's it going to be? And so that's how we scored these teams. What do you got?
I want to know your lowest first.
So I gave Haas a 1, and I'll explain really quickly. Haas signed 2 drivers at the end of their careers.
Yes, all of our viewers know.
K-Mag and Hulkenberg. Okay, yeah, they're average drivers. We scored the drivers already. I gave them a 5. But where's the potential? Where are they 3 years from now? They're going to have a completely different driver lineup. Gunther's probably not going to be there much longer,
Yeah,
honestly.
but whatever their driver's lineup is, you know that it's going to be somebody in the Ferrari Academy.
Yeah. I mean, they pulled Nico off the street. I mean, seriously.
Well, I mean, like, if they're going to go for younger drivers is what I meant. Give somebody an F2 a chance.
So what'd you give them?
I give him a 4.
Ugh.
And, you know, to discuss.
So high.
I gave them a 4 because I genuinely, and, you know, this is as Formula Bone likes to put it, as J-Bone likes to put it. Yeah, as J-Bone likes to put it. This might be my Haas delusion syndrome, but I gotta say I love Haas as a team, and I think that with Gunther leading, I think he's actually a pretty dang good leader. I mean, I'm being honest, I really do, and I think that they're gonna make better moves. They have made a better car. They've climbed up the middle of the pack. They're no longer at the back anymore. They're now 4 places up from that. I think that they're gonna keep advancing. Maybe they go to start fighting, I don't know, 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th regularly instead of
With K-Mag and Hulk?
I don't think that it's going to be K-Mag and Hulk. I think it's going to be one of them. I don't know which one because I think they both hold a very special place. Hulkenberg has dominant qualifying sessions, but K-Mag is a better racer.
Yeah, I really hope that they would have signed Logan Sargent. That would have been so fitting.
It would have been great. The American team with the American
They
driver.
could have.
They would have marketed the crap out
Yes,
of that.
and Gunther's so big on needing money from Gene. There's your money, Gunther.
All of America right there.
Okay, I gave Williams a 2 because, honestly, we're not seeing what we wanted to out of Logan Sargent, speaking of.
I gave him a 3.
And Alex Albon, while quick, is so inconsistent. So inconsistent.
I gave him a 3 because he's quick.
Yeah, that's the only redeeming factor. AlphaTauri and Alfa Romeo, I scored the same at a 4.
AlphaTauri 3, Alfa Romeo 2. AlphaTauri 3 because Yuki's got more potential than Alfa Romeo Zhou Guanyu.
Absolutely true. Things holding AlphaTauri back. I don't know about Danny Rick.
Danny Rick is kind of a...
He's got to be fighting for another seat on another team. He's got to be.
He's a hiccup in the story because he's actually not an AlphaTauri driver. He's more like a placeholder temporarily until his next move.
Right.
So we won't know what AlphaTauri can truly bring until they start working on their next project.
I agree. And Alfa Romeo gave the 4-2 mainly because of Valtteri.
Yeah.
Like he can get...
Joe's getting better. I'm not trying to discredit Joe, but
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember what it was, but we both agreed that he needed to show some sparks of like awesomeness, and we thought we almost had that in, was it Hungary?
Yeah, where they got 4th?
Got 4th and then blows it off the starting line.
Immediately. It was either 4th or 6th. I might have been giving way too much credit. I think it was 6th. Regardless, though, right off the jump, doesn't get the car to go at all, immediately falls to the back.
Yeah. You have to finish in the points, dude. You've got to finish
If you start in 6th...
Okay, let's talk about our big name teams. I have ramping up a team at 7, 8, 9, and 10. Actually, I have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I almost hit every number. I'll give you mine, and then
Let's hear it.
Alpine 5, because they're the most average team on the grid. Aston Martin 6, mainly because of the Lance thing, and because Fernando could retire or leave for another team at any minute.
Yeah.
Ferrari at a 7, and that kind of hurt to do. Mercedes at an 8, McLaren at a 9, Red Bull at a 10.
McLaren at a 9.
McLaren at a 9 because it's the two youngest hotshot drivers on the grid.
All right, now it's my turn. Because I was going with you, and it turns out that I don't have every single number, but mine's not that far off. So I'll start off with Alpine at a 6. We were pretty much spot on there. There's not much to go off of there. They're not really leading at anything crazy happening. Yeah, it's just nothing going on. Okay, after that, I have Mercedes and Ferrari both at 9s.
Wow.
And the reason I'll explain Ferrari because I understand you have them at
I'm
a
more
7.
interested actually in Mercedes' score on that one than Ferrari's.
Mercedes just because of the drivers and them starting to figure out the car. They're slowly starting to gain to Red Bull so much so as they've been in the fight for second for the past 5, 6 races.
Lewis's contract is up this year, bud.
It is. But do you really think that he's going to leave?
No.
Yeah. So that's nothing. And George Russell's going to continue to develop under the lead of Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton. So their potential is definitely a 9. Ferrari is a 9 because I genuinely think right now that if you took the strategist for Ferrari, fired them immediately, sent them on a boat to an island far, far away where they can't do any harm, and you brought in somebody completely different who didn't think anything like the other strategist, then Ferrari would be amazing. They have the drivers. They have the car. They just, that doesn't make sense. How can you have 2 of the top 5 drivers in the entire sport of F1 right now, and then you have
a top 2 car
and a top 2, well,
maybe top 3
car, and they're not finishing regularly at the top? That's ridiculous.
That's the same reason you gave is actually why I gave the potential score of 7. If they had fired Matteo and we saw a really big turnaround from Ferrari, I would probably give them a 10 potential just because of the drivers in the car.
I'm starting to wonder if it was even Matteo.
Yeah, because we're seeing the same stuff.
Exactly.
It's not as blatant of mistakes, like they're not putting on the wrong tires, but their pit stop.
Might as well.
Yeah, their pit stop strategy is confusing. Their ability to get things done on a race day, their ability to adapt and change plans, it's been a joke for two and a half seasons now. And it's a whole new team principal, whole new people on the pit wall. Still can't get it right.
Yeah, Fred Vasseur, I know that he's doing a great job over there, and
Maybe.
I know that Matteo Binotto was also doing a great job over there. He brought that team.
He developed
up.
the car.
He brought the team up from that. They were doing terrible, and he brought them up to contention, and then they fired him because their strategist is awful. Brought in a new guy, and their strategist is still awful. Because even if you replace the car, if it's the same car and it has the same malfunction, it's going to keep messing up.
It's the definition of insanity. You just keep doing the same thing over and over.
I'm going to talk
again.
about the last 2. I purposely left those 2 for the last because I have yours exactly, but flipped.
So you have McLaren 10, Red Bull 9?
I have McLaren 10 and I have Red Bull 9. McLaren 10 because they're developing that car at a very high rate and they have 2 of the best potential drivers in F1, current, not all time.
Yeah.
Now, Red Bull, they have Max Verstappen, but they have Sergio Perez, and we don't know what that situation is going to look like in the next few years coming, and see if he's going to stay on the team or not. That car, they took that cost cap penalty and that number 1 spot. They're going to have a lot less wind tunnel time than everybody else. So that car is not going to develop as well as they think, and I don't think the 2024 car is going to be ready. I mean, essentially what they want it to if they had full wind tunnel testing time.
So I'm going to disagree with you. I agree that McLaren's really on the up, and that's why they get a 9 for me. It's Lando, it's Oscar, it's a great car. Awesome. 3 names for you. Christian Horner, Max Verstappen, Adrian Newey.
That's fair.
Doesn't Max still outnumber every other constructor in points?
Yeah.
So remove Sergio. Put Zhou Guanyu on Red Bull right now, and Red Bull still has a 10 in performance.
Okay.
That's how crazy
Next question.
That is.
How long is Max going to stay at Red Bull? Because we've heard all of the interviews about how Max doesn't want to finish his career in F1. He wants to go and try all these different sports. He doesn't want to stay for his entire career just doing F1 for years and years and years. And he's basically I'm pretty sure he was like, he didn't want to just continually win every single year. It would get boring.
He's only 25. I bet he does this until he is at least 29 or 30 years old.
I say 28.
Even then, 3 years out from now is a pretty good while in Formula One. And I think I think if he doesn't retire from F1, which he definitely could do, I wonder if he jump ship for Ferrari. And I know that's crazy.
Just to see if he how good he really is.
And maybe he drives with Charles or Carlos or Lando or Oscar. What if Ferrari goes to Oscar Piastri and they go to Max Verstappen 2 seasons from now?
Put him in the same car.
And they form a super team? Ferrari would be the team to do that. And you think, that's crazy. Max would never leave Red Bull. They said the same thing about Sebastian Vettel.
That's true. That's true.
The dude went on a run and then said, all right.
An opportunity to race at the most lineage team in the entire sport of F1? Yeah, I'll take it.
But yeah, just the fact that he outnumbers every other constructor by himself in points, they get a 10 just because he's Max Verstappen.
Okay, I can see it.
Final category, the cool factor. This is so subjective, but I kind of stole this from Doug DeMuro. If you're familiar with the Doug DeMuro videos, he scores all the cars that he reviews, and he gives them a weekend score, a cool score, something like that. And it's just, how do you view the car? So sports cars do super well, and your soccer mom SUV does really poor. So this is our overall view of the team and how we think they do.
What is your most boring team?
AlphaTauri got a 2.
AlphaTauri got a 2? I got Alfa Romeo at a 2.
I gave Alfa Romeo, Haas, Williams, and Alpine all a 3.
I gave Alpine, Williams, and Haas all a 4.
Our French audience hates us.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Alpine's boring.
We just gave the all-French team a 3 for cool.
I've got Aston Martin at a 7. I think that they're starting to look on the up and up, and I think things are getting exciting. I see cool factor as the excitement meter, how much can you draw excitement from the audience.
It's not just how well you do, it's how cool is your brand, how cool are your drivers, how cool is your it's cool.
I've got AlphaTauri at a 5.
Ugh.
It's a little higher now that I'm looking back on it than I would have gone. I
You
would
gave
have put
their
them at a
livery
4.
a 1.
Because the livery sucks. But
And you gave their drivers a 3.
But I like AlphaTauri as a team, what it represents. It represents the next generation of who's going to be the best of the best at Red Bull in the future.
It's the B team.
I think that's cool, man.
It's the
We
Ferrari
see everybody
Academy.
anybody who's anybody comes out of that. We've seen Carlos Sainz come out of it, Sebastian Vettel. We've seen Max Verstappen come out of it. And then even if they don't go to Red Bull, they go off to other teams. Pierre Gasly. I mean, who knows if Yuki goes to Red Bull or if he goes to another team.
Yeah. There's 2 different approaches with the drivers. You either came from the Red Bull B team of AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso. You came from the Ferrari Driver Academy, right? Or you were just Mercedes hand-picked prodigy like George Russell was.
Now, they do have McLaren does have the off project that they'll take on, and Alpine has their own academy where they try to bring in their own drivers. But realistically, I mean, they pretty much, take their drivers from one of those 3 schools.
What are your highest 3 scores?
My highest 3 scores are going to be McLaren at an 8 and a tie for first with Red Bull and Mercedes.
Interesting.
At a 10. Now, there's nobody can take Red Bull being a 10 away from me because they literally are a company designed around extreme adrenaline junkie sports. It's not. They've taken an F1 car and done donuts at the top of massive towers on an itty bitty little platform. I mean, this team is psycho. And
Okay.
Mercedes. They're Mercedes, man. They're cool.
Yeah.
They've always got the slick liveries. Toto Wolff is this powerful man. Lewis Hamilton's got the fashion sense, and he's also one of the greatest of all time. I mean, they're a cool brand.
I gave Red Bull a 7.
Wow.
And I'm a Red Bull fan.
You gave the team that jumps into the pool at Monaco
So hang on.
in their full race gear, surrounded by the team, and then the team starts to jump in the pool.
Their car is boring. Everybody looks at it
Fair.
as boring.
Fair.
Their drivers are boring. I love Max Verstappen. I love Sergio Perez. They are not everybody's cup of tea.
That's fair.
Max is super dry when he's in race mode.
It's
Now
true.
there's funny videos of him and Yuki
Or
and
what
all
he
them.
says to his race engineer.
Yeah, they're not cool. Sergio's a dad. I don't know. They could be doing so much more on
He's
the
a
cool.
dad.
They could be doing so much more on the cool factor at Red Bull, considering everything that you said. Yeah, they're the company that jumps off of buildings and does all this cool stuff. I see none of that in their F1 operations because Christian Horner, the great team principal, runs a very tight, controlled, serious ship of Red Bull F1. That's why they're awesome.
You see, you say that, but then I'm over here watching YouTube videos of Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen.
But where's that in the race weekend? Who's going to see that?
Prank calling Christian Horner and saying some outlandish stuff to him.
This is Dodo Wolf.
like that's what I mean, though, is that whole team is personality, and it flows through them through and through. And that whole team is adrenaline fueled.
Okay, so I'm going to hit your others that you mentioned. I gave both Mercedes and McLaren 9s. McLaren because they have the two up-and-coming coolest drivers, I think, in Lando and Oscar. Lando's the most marketable driver in F1.
Yeah.
Oscar will quickly be that, I believe, with his history. And it's McLaren, which is already kind of cool. Mercedes, like you mentioned, they have Lewis. George isn't as cool, but I think he'll be good, and I think everybody recognizes that he'll be good. And again, it's Mercedes. But you left off one very important name in cool factor, sir.
In cool factor?
I gave Ferrari a 10.
I gave Ferrari a 7 for Snoozeville.
It's Ferrari.
And they're boring.
If McLaren has the coolest drivers, Ferrari probably has the second coolest drivers. They have the best livery every single year, and it's Ferrari. The excitement is a 10.
If you take Ferrari's lineage out of this equation altogether, they are a Snoozeville team.
You can't take their lineage out. I've considered every team's lineage.
Their personality that runs through the team, if you want to compare it to Red Bull, there's no fun. There's nothing interesting. That's very straightforward, very strict. Carlos Sainz is the only personality that runs through there. Charles Leclerc is even kind of boring as a personality's sake. Now, as a driver, he's great, and he might be animated on the track when things go wrong and stuff like that. So is Carlos Sainz, but as a personality, he's stale, he's boring. Fred Vasseur has a good personality, but we don't know much about him. He's boring.
They get a 10.
I don't understand how they get a 10. They
What's the most known car brand in the world? Ferrari.
Yeah, but we're not talking about Ferrari, the company. We're talking
Yes, we
about
are.
Ferrari Racing,
It's
the
when
F1 team.
when someone tunes into an F1 race and they see the Ferrari logo on the screen, they instantly know what it is.
So if you're talking about Ferrari as a company, everything that Ferrari stands for, then there is no way that you can tell me Red Bull's not a 10.
You did the same thing with Mercedes. And the reason that Red Bull gets held back, is because they don't bring those same cool Red Bull aspects to the track. Ferrari isn't jumping off buildings or anything. No, they're just synonymous with being awesome.
I guess they haven't been awesome for years.
All right.
I think until they get back to the championship, they're going to be boring for me. But that's what makes these so fun, is that you never know what you're going to get.
Where did y'all rank your cool? Apparently, this is the hottest of the categories of the cool factor.
It's the most subjective.
Like, I thoroughly disagree with you giving them a 7. I could not believe that you did that. But you can't believe that I gave them a 10, so I don't know. But we're kind of all on the same page with, I think, McLaren and Mercedes. I did give Aston a 7, just because they have Fernando Alonso and they have the new cool facility that they're going to get. I think Lance Stroll really brings that score down, though.
Yeah, I've got them at a 7. I think if Lance Stroll was replaced by
anybody,
that he would probably go up to an 8. And then if it was replaced by the right person, a 9.
Could be anybody but Lance Stroll and Asses would be way better. Okay, so like I said, we'll put all this in the description. We'll put it up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, our scores. We've tallied these up, and we have our top 10s. I'll give mine first. Number 10, AlphaTauri at a 2.9. Number 9, Haas with a 3.8. Number 8, Alfa Romeo with a 3.9. 7, Alpine with a 4.3. 6, Aston Martin with a 5.1. 5, Williams with a 5.7. Their history helped a lot. 4th, Red Bull with an 8.0.
Oh, no.
3 is going to be McLaren at an 8.1. Ferrari, second, at an 8.2. And number 1 is Mercedes at an 8.3.
Here's how I know that you were stingy with your ratings. Your highest one was an 8.3.
An 8.3. And my top 3 went 8, 8.2. Sorry, 8, 8.1, 8.2, 8.3. That was my top 4.
Jeez. All right. 10, I've got Alfa Romeo with a 3.8. 3.9, I've got in ninth place AlphaTauri, so they got 0.1 more points. And they're pretty much interchangeable. It doesn't matter. Haas comes in 8th with a 4.3. Alpine in 7th with a 4.9. Aston Martin made their way up to 6th with a 5.4. And funny enough, Williams makes their way up to 5th.
Yeah, the history
with a
helps so
5.9. Yeah. McLaren gets up to 4th with a 7.6. Ferrari up to 3rd with an 8.8. And my top two, Red Bull with a 9 flat and Mercedes with the 9-1 win.
So just examining these, obviously I agree with your Red Bull kind of being number 2 or number 3, somewhere in there. They got 4th on mine, mainly because their livery got a 4.
Yeah, you were very harsh on their livery. Here's the thing about Red Bull's livery. I understand that it never changes from year to year, but it's still a cool livery. It really is. I think the bull in the back is cool. I think the different colored front, at the front where they have the wing, I think that's really cool. I mean, it is a cool car. It's just, it gets boring when it doesn't change for 10 years.
We have the same top 4, though. They're just in different order, but I do find it interesting that we both have Mercedes at 1, and I think it's a couple things. One, they have one of the best team principals. They have some of the best drivers. Their current performance isn't bad. They've got some of the best liveries, the best facilities, and their history is better than anybody. It just...
Except for Ferrari.
I mean, it just kind of pushes them up. What I meant was their history and the time they've been in the sport. They've been in a sport a shorter amount of time than Red Bull, and they've won more.
Right, and then the final two sections that you didn't even talk about, their potential, they're not going anywhere. They're building for the future, and they're maintaining their spot at the top. And their cool factor, the way that they outreach to their fans is ridiculous. You see Mercedes everywhere when you look in the stands, when you look at the background.
Lewis is still by far the most popular F1 driver.
Every single time he gets out of the car, if he's on a podium, before he walks over and does the interview and does all that stuff, he walks over to the crowd and he puts his hands up and waves, and the entire the entire track erupts. I mean, it's just...
Last point of interest, our 7, 6, and 5 were also the same. Alpine, Aston, and Williams. Williams probably should be lower on that list now, but again, their history and their livery and their facility. Williams' facility, I don't know if y'all have looked at this. I don't know how great it is really, but it is massive.
Yeah, it really is. That helped out their score a lot too. For their facility, I give them a 9.
They've got to have something in there worthwhile.
Yeah, here's the thing. If you look at this if you look at this rankings for how our final 10 played out, it almost looks kind of how you would expect the constructors to look. But there's little caveats. So Williams is up at 5th.
Yeah.
So here's my thoughts on this. Okay, so if all of these we're talking about, how good is your team principal? How good are your drivers? How good is your facilities? Those are all important things to not only judge the team, but have a successful team, period. So when you look at Williams, their team their team principal, you look at their facilities, you look at the potential, they should be higher up in the constructors than they are. And I think this is kind of funny that we both have them at 5, because that also kind of means that as far as the constructors goes, they should be middle of the pack. They have the facilities, they have a good team principal, they have good drivers except for Logan, but
I gave James Vowles as their team principal.
Yeah.
Gave him an 8.
I gave James Vowles a good grade too. I gave him a 7.
Yeah, that's better than most.
So that was our standings for the constructors.
Yeah.
Remembering this not just based on their current performances, but an array of different categories that we have set up.
Yeah, so again, we posted all this in the description. So fill out your own scorecard and send it to us, or send us your big scores and let us know how you rank the drivers. And Jeremiah, what's your random question of the day for the
guys?
audience?
I want to know if you think that Gunther Steiner should suit up and replace Kevin Magnussen, because I genuinely think that would make Haas's ratings go up dramatically in a lot of these categories. Let me know what you think.
All right, thanks guys.
Bye guys.